This episode was from Season 1 and was Episode 9, directed by Rob Bauman, with a story written by Larry Forrester. This episode originally aired on November 16th, 1987. The guest stars were Frank Corsentino, who played Bach, Doug Warhit, who played Kazago, and Robert Towers, who played Rada. This episode would mark the second appearance of the Ferengi in the series. The USS Stargazer NCC-2893 is a Constellation-class starship. The 4-foot filming model of the ship would be based on Rick Sternbach's model. Sternbach used parts from different model kits to create the Stargazer, and these kits would include the AMT, Star Trek The Motion Picture USS Enterprise refit model from 1979, as well as the VF-1 Valkyrie for the details. But it would be Greg Jean who would create the 4-foot filming model used in the episode. On stardate 41723.9, the USS Enterprise NCC-1701D would be ordered to rendezvous with the Ferengi vessel in the Xendi Sabu star system. The Ferengi vessel would request a meeting specifically with the Enterprise. The Enterprise would arrive at the rendezvous point and, with the Ferengi ship, would wait 3 days before communications would be established. Their inquiries would only be met with standby Enterprise. Captain Picard would start to feel fatigued as well and start getting headaches. Dr. Crusher could find nothing wrong with him immediately, but suggested further testing. Commander Riker would then notify the captain that the Ferengi were requesting communications. The Ferengi commander would be identified as Damon Bach. Bach would state that he knew Picard, and he would go on to say that they both had a mutual problem. Damon Bach would say that he would only speak of it in person, and he would ask, "Your ship or mine?" Immediately, Deanna Troi would signal for the communications to be severed. She would inform the captain that she sensed considerable deception coming from Bach. Commander Riker would suggest meeting on the Enterprise, citing that any problems could be dealt with more easily. Upon re-establishing communications, Captain Picard would inform Damon Bach that he would be welcome to be a guest aboard the Enterprise. Bach would agree and say he would meet Picard in 1 hour. During that time period, Dr. Crusher would order Picard into sickbay and examine him. She would still be unable to determine the cause of the captain's headaches. While back on the bridge, Wesley Crusher would inform Commander Riker that long-range sensors had detected a vessel approaching. And Geordi LaForge would inform Commander Riker that the vessel was indeed a Constellation-class starship. Captain Picard would show signs of discomfort as his headaches became increasingly worse. The approaching vessel would give no signal or identity of any kind. And later, when Damon Bach would transport to the bridge of the Enterprise, he would be accompanied by his first officer, Kazago, and his second officer, Rada. Captain Picard would introduce First Officer Riker, Second Officer Data, and Counselor Troi. Damon Bach would comment that females were in the Federation and they had heard of that, and they heard that they were fully clothed. They would also show interest in Mr. Data and request to purchase him. Captain Picard would inform them that Mr. Data was not for sale, and Commander Riker would add that you don't want him, he was second-hand merchandise, and that they would not be interested. Mr. Data acknowledged it to be a human joke. Damon Bach would inform Captain Picard that the approaching starship was under his control. Captain Picard responded, "One of our ships under your control?" But Damon Bach assured him not to be alarmed, and that the approaching vessel was a gift from them to honor the hero of Maxia. Picard did not know what he was talking about. Data informed him of a confrontation that occurred 9 years earlier in the Maxia Zeta star system, which an unidentified vessel, and before he could go on, Damon Bach showed great irritation. "Unidentified?" he angrily asked. "That was a fine Ferengi vessel." Continuing, Mr. Data would add, "Which you destroyed, sir." Captain Picard seemed to recall. The Battle of Maxia I have never heard it referred to so dramatically before. Captain Picard informed Damon Bach, "My regrets, but that vessel refused to identify itself and attacked us. We had to defend ourselves." Damon Bach would reply, "Such mistakes happen in space." Mr. Data would add, "Hardly a mistake, sir. Your report states that it deliberately attacked." Tasha Yar would then inform the captain that the vessel was 1,000 kilometers away. And after seeing the ship for the first time, Damon Bach informed the captain that no one was on board. He said that the logs from the ship could be downloaded into the Enterprise. Rada then added, "For a price." Bach immediately said, "No price." And as the ship grew closer, he had informed Picard that it was a gift, no charge. This made Kazago and Rada question him, saying how ugly it was that there was going to be no profit in the exchange. Suddenly, Captain Picard showed signs of a severe headache. Counselor Troi sensed something from his past, and Damon Bach would suggest that it was a direct result of Captain Picard's conscience. Upon inspection, Captain Picard would realize that it was his old ship, the USS Stargazer. He asked how they had gotten it. Damon Bach said that it was a derelict ship that was adrift on the far side of the solar system, and how it got there was not his business. And it was now a gift to Captain Picard if he would like it. Later, Captain Picard would be in sickbay following up on the episode he felt on the bridge earlier. He said that he felt he was back on the helm of the Stargazer and that he smelled smoke. Later, Captain Picard would describe the encounter with the Ferengi vessel, while saying he was traveling in the Maxia star system at Warp 2, when a vessel suddenly approached him and attacked him. They fired at point-blank range, and Commander Riker asked where the ship came from. Picard responded that it must have come from somewhere in a deep moon crater. And the first attack would damage the shields, and in the confusion, they hit a second time. No identification at all would be from that ship. Captain Picard then referred to Counselor Troi as Vigo, asking if he could identify the ship. They all looked at him, and she asked him who Vigo was. And then he looked at her puzzled, realized it was Counselor Troi. He said Vigo was his weapons officer aboard the Stargazer. He then looked at Commander Riker and said, "Ooh, I'm getting caught up in this." Commander Riker said, "Your shields were failing, sir?" So Captain Picard continued, "I improvised. With the enemy vessel coming in for the kill, I ordered a sensor bearing, and when it came in for the return arc, that is when Mr. Data added, it was the Starfleet textbooks referred to now as the Picard maneuver." Picard would continue, "I did what any good helmsman would have done. I went into high warp, stopped right off the enemy's bow, and fired with everything I had." Commander Riker would add, "And then blowing into warp speed, at that instant, the way you did, you appeared to be in two places at once." Captain Picard nodded and added, "Our attacker fired on the wrong ship." Later he would add, "It was a save-our-skin maneuver. They ultimately had to abandon the ship, and they were in a shuttlecraft for weeks before being picked up." Mr. Data and Lieutenant Yar would lead an away team to make sure the Stargazer was secure before the captain beamed over. When all clear was given, he would beam directly to the bridge. He was looking around, amazed at the old ship. "Hello, old friend," he said. He went to his old cabin later, and he was looking through his things, and that is when we notice a glowing red ball in the chest, and it starts to glow red. As soon as it began to glow, Captain Picard winced in pain and grabbed his head. We then see Damon Bach, as he has an identical glowing red ball in front of him. As he rotates the center strip, we see the pain in Captain Picard increase. Dr. Crusher sees him and orders him back to the Enterprise. She also arranges for all his possessions to be brought to the Enterprise for him. Arrangements are later made to take the Stargazer in tow, and the Enterprise would rendezvous with a tug who would take possession of the ship. After giving the bridge to Commander Riker, Captain Picard would go to his quarters and lie down. We would notice the blue trunk from the Stargazer containing the red glowing ball in his room. And we later see Mr. Data inform Commander Riker that the captain's personal log is much different than the historical accounts. It claims that the Ferengi ship was under a flag of truce and did not provoke an attack. And in a voice that appears to be Captain Picard's, we hear him confess that he mistook the antenna for the weapon's tower. Direct results of phaser fire ultimately destroyed the vessel. Commander Riker would refuse to believe that he would say anything that suggested that, let alone hear a confession from Captain Picard. He deduced that they had altered or simulated his voice in some way, and later on a secure channel to the Ferengi ship, Commander Riker would ask First Officer Kazago, why would Damon Bach freely give a ship knowing it had a confession on it? Kazago would be insulted and end the conversation. Meanwhile, Picard would be suffering more and more from his headaches. He would start questioning his sanity, and he started discussing his dreams with Dr. Crusher about being on the Stargazer. She would give him a sedative and let him rest, and he would dream about being aboard the ship in the old 9 years ago in the old Stargazer. It would be surrounded by flames and damage and chaos. He would hear the personnel yelling on the bridge, and he would ultimately give the order to fire, destroying the unknown ship. While in his dreams and agonizing, we see Damon Bach smiling as he continues to manipulate the globe in his possession. He would say, "You hurt yourself the way you hurt me." Meanwhile, Mr. Data would inform Commander Riker that the captain's log, while aboard the Stargazer, was indeed a forgery. Later on, Wesley Crusher would tell his mom, Dr. Crusher, and Counselor Troy that the brainwaves from the captain's scan were identical to low-intensity signals coming from the Ferengi ship. They would inform Commander Riker of this discovery. Dr. Crusher would tell him that the captain's thought process was being affected by the signal coming from the Ferengi ship. Commander Riker would ask the computer on the captain's location. At the time, he would be in the transporter room, and as an update, a few seconds later, the captain would leave the ship and beam over to the Stargazer. While on the bridge of the Stargazer, Captain Picard would meet Damon Bach on the bridge. Bach would be holding his globe. He would immediately say, "Computer, shields up." That would prevent the Enterprise from beaming over. He then would tell Picard that he was collecting on an old debt, and he went on to tell Picard that he murdered his only son. His son had been the Daemon on the ship that was destroyed, and he had said that it was his first mission as a Daemon. He would tell Captain Picard that the computer would respond to his commands as the crew did, and that he wished him to die well. Damon Bach would then beam back to his ship. With his mind being altered by Damon Bach's device, Captain Picard would be reliving the incident in his mind when he destroyed the unknown ship. But in actuality, he would be acting out against the Enterprise. Meanwhile, back on the Enterprise, they would find one of Bach's glowing red globes in the captain's quarters in the trunk that was brought over from the Stargazer. Riker would show it to Kazago, and Kazago would tell him that it was a thought maker, and that it was a device that was forbidden to them. While back on the Stargazer, Captain Picard was seeing his ship being destroyed. He would see fire and confusion on the bridge, as well as be choking on smoke. His ship was on the verge of being destroyed. At least that's what he saw in his mind. And while trying to make contact with him, Commander Riker would get a message from Kazago. Kazago would inform him that he did not want to get involved in what was now a Federation matter. He also told Riker that his Damon Bach, was being detained due to unprofitable behavior. He would then wish Commander Riker luck and end communications. Sensing that the captain would use the Picard maneuver against him, Riker ordered Mr. Data to create a defense against it. The solution was that sensing the particles in space and the displacement, the Enterprise could track the Stargazer that way and use a tractor beam on it. And as soon as the Stargazer warped towards them, the Enterprise held her in a tractor beam. Commander Riker was able to communicate with Picard and informed him of the mind control device. He told him it was a silver sphere, and he told Picard to destroy it. Captain Picard would fire his phaser on it, breaking the mind link. This would immediately clear Captain Picard's thinking and cause the pain to vanish. Once his thoughts began to clear, he asked where he was. Riker told him he was on a Stargazer. He then asked, "Where is Bach?" And Riker informed him that he had been removed from command and placed under guard for his actions of personal vengeance. "Apparently there is no profit in it," Commander Riker said. The response from Captain Picard would be, "There never is."